You can't get food any more local than in your own garden. But what if you can't grow it yourself? The next best thing is to source it locally from someone who can. Hi there, I'm Linda and this is Huttons Valley Permaculture. Recently a friend asked me if I could supply her with a weekly basket of vegetables. And given that I've just harvested 90 kilos of potatoes and 20 of onions, I thought maybe my garden was ready to support others.
Now to the
In today's video, we're going to have a look around the garden and see what I can gather for this week's basket. Okay, we're going to start with our zucchinis as they're really productive at this time of year. But just have a look at this beautiful auric. Auric is a type of spinach, also known as, I think, mountain spinach, although I'll pop that on the screen. I've been leaving this plant to go to seed, so the seeds are just about ready to harvest and I'll be able to move those on.
Now back to the zucchini.
We'll definitely grab this zucchini. I usually don't leave them to go as big as this one, but it's got away from me. So we'll grab that one and get our basket started. As I've got 4 zucchini plants, I do have plenty to share, and I'll often give both to this friend of mine and also to the neighbours. This one here is the size I generally pick, and it keeps on top of the zucchini supply so you don't get inundated. The third zucchini plant with fruit ready to harvest is this one here in my winter garden. No need to hand pollinate these flowers. Plenty of sunflowers in the garden at the moment. This will be the third basket I've supplied to my friend, and generally I start with the produce that I know I've got plenty of, like zucchinis, and the next one I know I've got plenty of is the green beans. There's just heaps. These bean plants are just producing masses and masses of beans. Sometimes they kind of get away from me, and that's the size that I'm going to be throwing to the chickens and maybe cooking them up. But this size is what I generally like to enjoy myself. So I'll have a basket for the chickens and a basket for my friend and myself. I think that should be enough. Just before we move on and find some other veg to give my friend, I thought we'd just have a look at this area here. This is where I grew these beans just as a support and garden filler until I got my tomatoes going. But I couldn't help myself but leave them, and they've been really amazingly productive. But has it been at the expense of my tomato plants? So let's have a look at that now. Just across the path in this garden bed here, I've got tomatoes that haven't had beans planted in next to them. And these tomatoes are getting really quite large. Whereas the tomatoes over in this bed, you can see that they're noticeably smaller. Now, it looks like some of them have been struggling to get enough light and get going. They're slowly getting going. And the question is whether I would use the beans as a support for these tomatoes again. And I don't know if I would. It's really taken over this whole garden bed, and it's the lack of light that's supplied to these plants that is impacting them. Luckily, I have plenty of other tomatoes in these other beds, and I've got various volunteers around the place, so I will definitely not be short of tomatoes. Tomato plants like this one right at the end of my bean bed have been doing great because they've had the light all day. And there's a couple down here that are starting to get quite large. They're reaching for the sky and getting their own light. But then there's some other little ones here that's really been challenged in the shade. I do have a second bean bed that's next to my little polytunnel over there. So once that's kicked into production, I might just trim back this bean trellis here, but it's a really hard thing to do because it's so amazingly productive. And I'm sharing not only with my friend, but with the neighbours. So it might be at the expense of some of these little tomatoes. These tomatoes are at the other end of the bean bed, and you can see that they're getting larger and not having that light restriction impact their growth. So would I do my beans again with the preparation of my tomato beds? Well, I might if I could trust myself to cut those plants off as I'm putting the tomatoes in, but I find that really difficult. What might be a better thing to do is just grow your beans and then grow things that do prefer a bit more shade, like your lettuce plants, down in this space here, because I don't think these tomatoes are really going to be at their best. Good to see some tomatoes not too far away. I've got these gorgeous little blueberry tomatoes, which are just delicious on their way as well. Now the next thing I can grab is a couple of beetroot. Some of my beetroot are getting really huge, and I'll keep that for myself and maybe roast it or chip it. But these ones are a perfect little size. So I'll get one of the red ones for her. And over here, I have golden beetroot. The leaves of these are really nice to eat too, so they're a good one to grab out. Just here I've got a few carrots growing. There's some that are already starting to go to seed with the hot weather we've been having, so I'm going to grab out a few of these. Perfect. Just here I've got a few cucumber plants. They're really starting to take off with the warmer weather, and they've got a heap of flowers, and most excitingly, they've got some fruit coming. So not far off, but not quite ready for this week's basket. Something that is ready though is my corn. It's a golden bantam corn, and I had a sneak peek at some of the cobs yesterday, and they're really filling up and looking beautiful and juicy. So I think I'll be able to share some of these this week. Look at that. Should be delicious. I'll keep this one for myself, and I'll grab some more for my friend. While we're in the corn patch, I'd like to show you my beans. They're all growing up these stalks beautifully and starting to pod up a bit. They're the lovely little frost bean, which I use for a dry bean. So once the corn is finished, I'll leave these just as trellising until these beans are ready to harvest. This corn is a really exciting addition to the basket this week. Something that I've been adding to the basket the last couple of weeks is some basil. Now this is a Thai basil, and I'll be grabbing some of this. You just kind of pinch it out just down there, and if I pinch out all those points that are developing flowers, it'll actually keep the plant growing more leaf and less of the flowers and going to seed than if you've left it. So I'll be picking this just before I go and deliver my basket today, so it's beautiful and fresh. Other basil that I've been sharing has been this beautiful purple basil, and also the sweet basil. This basil here is ready to thin out a little bit too, so once again you just kind of pinch it out down below here, and that gives the rest of the plant a chance to kick into growth. Something I'm excited to share with you all is my eggplants. They're starting to get their little flowers on there, so it won't be long before we're harvesting these beautiful fruits. This little garden is actually looking quite good. These are little chili plants that are starting to get some flowers on them. This is a Hungarian wax chili, so it's got its first nearly ripe fruit on it. This little plant here is a type of basil as well, which you can just add to your cooking. I haven't grown that before. I bought a punnet of all sorts of different basil, including this one here, and it's been really worthwhile because I wouldn't have tried all of these varieties if I'd just bought the seeds. Here's some more flowers coming on another of my eggplants. Now I'm going to add some of my kale. My kale's been growing pretty good and hasn't had much in the way of pest damage, although you can see some holes there. We might just move him off. I've got 3 different kale that I am going to share today, and I'll take some leaves off each plant. That's a good bunch of the Tuscan kale. And I've got some of this red Russian kale. And the third variety of kale is this curly leaf kale here, which is actually a volunteer plant. I find these plants volunteer really well in the garden. So don't pull them out when they're going to seed. You can enjoy a lot of food from these free plants. There's a few little insect bites on it, but my friend's a permie, so she won't mind. Now, as soon as we finish in the garden, I'll be taking those in and putting them into water to keep them fresh so that they're good on arrival at my friend's. Now, just beyond my sweet potato bed, which is going great, I've got a few more greens that I'll grab and add to the basket. This Swiss chard plant is another volunteer. It'll be great to share those leaves, which look perfect. But I don't mind eating these with a few holes in them. Now we're going to head over the back here and grab one more thing. Just beyond my little carrot bed that's starting to grow really well is my onion patch, which I've left to go to seed, and the seeds are starting to form. But there's a lot here, and what I do like to do with all these onion greens is make a big batch of onion salt each year. Today I'm going to grab a batch of these green onions so that my friend can also make her onion salt. The recipe needs about 300 grams of these green onions, so that should be plenty for her. That's my basket of produce all harvested. I will be adding some potatoes, onions and garlic before I go. I'm also going to harvest some basil last minute to add in. And to make the onion salt, you need some chives. So I'm going to trim some chives just so that she's got all the ingredients she needs to make a beautiful batch of onion salt herself. Well, I'm going to head in and get these greens soaking in some water so they're nice and fresh when I deliver them this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Thanks so much for watching, and bye for now.